Welcome to another episode of Keeping It Realty with Marc and Brian. Big shout out to East Brother Beer Company out in Point Richmond on Canal Boulevard. Definitely go check them out. Awesome beer, great time, even for the family too. So let's get right into the topic. We've got some very interesting topics here. The very first one is basically checking in on Gavin Newsom's goal of 500,000 units per year. Is that even happening?
Well, I think in the very beginning, when we heard about that whole goal, I thought it was very, very lofty and unrealistic. The number sounds amazing. Technologically speaking, we have the ability to do that, if not for the fact that the bureaucracy gets in the way. For example, and we're going to touch on a couple of these things, there are laws between the state and chartered cities, it turns out, that are diametrically opposed and allow power to be placed in the hands of the dreaded NIMBYs. But it's not that it's not. It's again, just looking at it from that dynamic and everything that law or that goal has in front of it, I think it's very unrealistic. And which you're going to find out.
And that's nothing new either. I mean, we predicted that this was going to be very unrealistic for Gavin Newsom to hit these goals, and it's great in a way that he's really put housing in the spotlight and wanting to hit those numbers, but realistically, it just can't happen. There's way too many people that do not want new construction to happen for one reason or another, but we need it as a state. And when you look at certain examples, so right after Newsom took over governorship, he really pushed a great law into legislation that basically says if a developer wants to build on a piece of land, high density, and it falls within the city's own zoning requirements, meaning there's no conflict of interest, they are allowed to streamline the project right through it and build the project. Now, many cities don't like this.
The big reason of that, obviously, is to solve the big problem, which is, lack of housing or affordable housing. But
and to build more inventory, yeah. And so cities don't like this because they feel as if the state's imposing on their right to decide on what they really want or not. But then it makes you wonder, well, if it's within the law of the city and within the zoning requirements, why can't they just build it? And that's where a conflict lies. And so a perfect example is in city of Palo Alto. So they rejected developer sued and won under this law. However, over in San Mateo recently, very similar situation. The developer had this development project. City of San Mateo did not want it despite the project meeting its zoning requirements. Developer sued under this law, and a judge came back and ruled in favor of the city of San Mateo, basically saying because they are a chartered city, they have the right to deny this project. So this is going to be interesting to see what happens with the appeals and the later challenges, because this could potentially ruin that statewide law that Gavin Newsom helped put into effect that would help streamline a lot of these projects. And if that gets eliminated, we're talking about even less development than what's going on right now.
In fact, you want to kind of give them a quick synopsis of the difference between chartered cities and unchartered cities. It's an additional level of due diligence that as a developer, you have to really check to see if the laws that Gavin Newsom has empowered us with to be able to provide more housing are in conflict with where we want to put them in. So
when a city incorporates in the state of California, they have two choices. They can go through general law code, which basically states they're going to adopt the California Civil Code on how a city is ran and governed, or they can go through a chartered city, which expands upon that, and they can add additional rules and regulations and ordinances, extra taxes, etc. Cities like San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, San Mateo, Richmond, these are examples of chartered cities. What the judge determined was because they were a chartered city and had additional regulations in place beyond the state, they did not have to comply with the state law. Now, there are some experts that say, well, there's some faulty misunderstanding here by the judge. But at the end of the day, the city of San Mateo won this in court. And of course, there's going to be appeals. And so as a developer, like what Brian was saying, is you need to check the city if they're a general law or if it's a chartered city. If it's a chartered city, you might have to deal with much more legal battles than a general law city, simply because now they've got precedents.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that developer who went through that process only to get rejected probably already spent several $100,000 to maybe a few million just in soft costs to get it to that point, only to be rejected. So it just makes developers think twice, which again, it makes them increase their prices or their costs. And of course, the only way to offset those increased costs is to increase the rent, which goes totally against creating more affordable housing.
So our next topic is a crackdown on private listings, aka pocket listings. So recently, the National Association of Realtors passed a new MLS policy that goes to all the MLSs that are governed by the Realtor Association. MLS, for many of you that may not know the acronym, stands for Multiple Listing Service. So I, as a real estate agent, decide I'm going to place a house for sale on the market. Well, I place that on my local realtor's MLS system, the Multiple Listing Service, which then syndicates out to Zillow and all the various different websites so that the public can then see the house listed for sale. And it's also a database for agents to be able to access previously sold properties, what's actively on the market, and what's currently under contract. And so one issue that's happened a lot in the industry are pocket listings, and many of agents have been lobbying to get some kind of solution to this. And the problem is, if let's say Brian wants to sell his house and he decides to hire me to sell the house for him, well, there's a pocket listing simply means I take the property as a listing, and then I try to market the property myself within our own company in order to procure a buyer for it. And
another way to look at it is it's an off-market deal or something that isn't readily available to everybody, which is a seller's choice in some cases, which will kind of explain why they would want that, want to make it an off-market deal.
Yeah, current regulations already state that when we have a new listing agreement, we have to put that on the MLS so the entire public can see it. However, with a waiver, the seller can decide, no, I want this to remain as a pocket listing. I want you, or as an off-market listing, just keep it off the MLS. Now, what's happened is, instead of me as an agent marketing within my own company, I then go out and market to the public selectively, and I might pitch it to other real estate agents I know. I might pitch it to various friends that are loan officers, title reps, and I start advertising the property to what's considered the public, way beyond what my internal company is made up of. And so this becomes a problem because one of the arguments is, well, if a deal is struck before the property goes on the MLS or ever hits the MLS, but it's actively being marketed to various people in the public, well, that does not give a fair chance to the entire public who may be looking to buy a house that falls under the criteria of a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home. And so there's unfair advantages, and that's what they're trying to crack down on. And it's been a problem, I mean, since I got into real estate in 2003. It's always been going on. Mm-hmm. And so this is a step that the National Association of Realtors has now taken in order to kind of crack down on this.
So, of course, you got to wonder, where's this all going? Well, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Lo and behold, these different actions are now resulting in a lawsuit and then now a crackdown onto the MLSs, which, again, it just makes it more cumbersome to put properties on the market, and in fact sometimes might be in conflict with what the owner wants.
And my concern is going to be, how are they going to regulate this? Because if I go and pitch your property to, let's say, a loan officer, well, I've now violated this rule unless I get the property listed on the MLS immediately. But if I don't, I violate this rule. Who's going to enforce it? How do you prove this? How do you catch it? And I think that's going to be the big problem with this, is the enforcement. So at the end of the day, I'm not super confident in this, but we'll have to give it, a few months and see what happens.
It just might be just might be another big waste of taxpayer money. Going down, trying to blockbust what they think is an antitrust violation.
Next topic, we have problem tenants and drugs. So this is something that we've dealt with a few times. It's not common, but it does happen out there. And what happens? How do you get rid of a tenant that could be potentially, or maybe they're dealing drugs from their apartment building?
And by the way, just a quick interjection here. Where this is all going is in prior episodes we've talked about the statewide rent control that has been passed, of which it incorporates a just cause. In existing cities like nearby, close to us, like San Francisco or Oakland or Berkeley, there's already just cause that's implemented within their rent control, and it gives very specific reasons by which a landlord could evict somebody. And so now that the state has adopted, the entire state of California, that is, has adopted statewide rent control and has also brought in this just cause, albeit it's given it a little bit more reasons to evict somebody, it still puts us in a position where the landlord, the property management company are at odds with the law. So, Mark?
Because the burden of proof falls on the landlord. And so January 1st of 2020 is when this new AB 1482 goes into effect. And so prior to that, let's say, for example, your property sits in a city that has no rent control and no just cause. And so what happens is, if you suspect one of your tenants are dealing drugs and you've got multiple complaints from neighbors or other tenants within the complex, it's very simple to get rid of those tenants, because you simply give a notice to vacate. As long as you comply with a 30, 60, or 90 day, depending on what's applicable, then they have to leave the property, and that's it. And then you get yourself another tenant. With just cause evictions coming into play, it won't be that easy. You have to have a reason. Now, if a tenant is dealing drugs, that is a reason. They are violating law and lease terms. However, the burden of proof falls on you as a landlord. So as a landlord, if you see, or if you count 100 people going in and out of the tenant's apartment and you suspect they're dealing drugs, how do you prove that? You can't, because you don't have any photos, any video. You've got nothing to go off of that you can prove to a judge that this person is dealing drugs.
In fact, when we were role-playing different, crazy scenarios by which you could prove this, it would result in you essentially having to go in undercover and buy drugs from your tenant that you suspect is selling drugs, get it on video, which, by the way, you're now getting yourself on video committing a crime, and then report it. Ironically, if you report that to a police officer that you suspect there's drug activity going on, they're going to probably not police it or even really react to it, but at the same time warn you that you shouldn't be doing what you're contemplating doing, which is buying drugs from your tenant on camera, recorded, to prove that they're doing this, which, even if it got to the point of going to court, it would probably be inadmissible evidence to begin with. So there's all kinds of wrong with the way that this has gone down.
So yeah, you end up incriminating yourself, and you end up with evidence that might still be inadmissible in court, and that becomes a problem. And so really the solution to fix problems like this is, number one, you have to screen your tenants properly and make sure you know who's moving into your rental properties. That's by far number one. Number two is you need to open up a communication line with every single tenant in the complex and get familiar with everyone, who they are, where they work, etc. Have that communication back and forth, because the better you communicate as a landlord with your tenants, the more they will communicate with you about problems, so you can stop these problems way in advance before they become a much more serious problem. So next topic is the rise of Skywalker. We've got Star Wars Episode 9 that just premiered on Monday down in Hollywood, and they've got it.
Did it actually premiere already?
Yeah, they did a special premiere.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Just for Hollywood.
Just for Hollywood.
Yeah, and guess what? The reviews are out, and you have 50% of the people hate it, 50% of the people love it. So you have 50% that love it because they say it's a great ending, it ends the saga, blah, blah, blah. Then you have the other 50% that hate it because they confirmed that the leaks out there are true.
Really? Okay.
And I guess it depends. Like, I read the leaks and I feel like it's okay. But I mean, you can make it really work well on screen. So I don't think the leaks were as bad as people claim they are, but I just think you have a lot of people with super high expectations of Star Wars, and no matter what happens, they'll always be unhappy.
Well, I mean, I'm going to actually, Sandy, my wife, got us tickets for this Saturday after we get back from LA, just before we go off on our international trip here. And I'm looking forward to seeing this as well. And I've seen the little taglines for different leaks that might be going on, and like how the whole universe has been ruined. And I've been trying to not watch those things. You know, again, I'm a long-standing Star Wars fan. Remember it when I was 4 years old and followed it all the way up to my, I won't drop my age, but and having had so much backstory on the whole Star Wars universe, especially with the novels that expanded on beyond Return of the Jedi. I know there's a plethora of amazing stories within this universe that I've yet to be told. In fact, they're beginning to do that with Disney Plus. I just personally myself haven't been a huge fan of this particular trilogy. And even if this is a bad movie, which I'm hoping it's not, at best, I'm hoping it's a good movie. I still think that there's a lot of really good content that Disney, if they do it correctly, could get from just the series, because they have a streaming series now, and future movies. In fact, we talked about some of those things. But
well, the Mandalorian TV show right now is doing really well.
Yeah,
I mean, go.
That's awesome.
You can't go wrong with Baby Yoda. I mean, the fact whoever came up with that idea from Disney, genius. And
I think it was Jon Favreau who did that. I mean, if you look at the credits, he's producing, he's writing these stories, and he's acting in these stories as well. I mean,
yeah, but who really said, "Hey, we need a Baby Yoda in this series"? Who said that? Yeah. That's who I want to know.
Yeah.
Because that person, genius.
Well, I might have the privilege of actually getting to go have lunch with Jon Favreau here soon, so maybe I'll ask him who that was.
So of course, with The Mandalorian, there's a lot of people really giving that TV show praise, because that's getting away from all the, like, if you look at the movies, Star Wars historically has really followed the human race throughout the Star Wars universe, and they haven't really focused so much on the actual aliens themselves. Whereas if you go into the comic books, the various books, there's a lot about the aliens in the Star Wars universe.
Oh yeah, totally.
And so I think the Mandalorian TV show is kind of going back to those roots, where they want to focus not just on the humans, but the actual universe. And that's what's making it special, because you're seeing so many interactions with a wide range of different species on the show. And of course, Baby Yoda.
Right. Well, again, we can go on and on about these different backstories that they might turn into live action. I mean, like I've heard rumblings about telling the story of Darth Vader after he got his armor in what was the last episode of the Phantom Menace trilogy? It was
Revenge of the Sith.
Revenge of the Sith. Yeah, just before Star Wars, right? As there's that story. There's the young Obi-Wan Kenobi story.
One of the female directors, I think she did episode 3 of The Mandalorian. She's got the entire series for the Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah,
and that'll be on Disney Plus.
And just to put things in perspective, I mean, Disney is prepared on their streaming service to actually lose money for the next 8 years. In other words, they're going to run negative, putting money into the streaming service, all because of all of these large conglomerates going after the holy grail that Netflix has achieved of $1.5 billion a month, just from these little itty bitty monthly subscriptions that everybody pays. And of course, that pays for all this amazing content. Disney is already flush with cash from all of its other IP. And so, we could expect a lot of things to come. I mean, it's one of those times when you were a kid growing up and just fantasizing about all these things that they could do, but now as an adult seeing it, and it's hard to keep up with it.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens on Netflix, and this can be a whole nother segment where we dive into the actual numbers. Like, Disney is pulling a lot of people away from Netflix and other streaming platforms like Amazon. And there's a phenomenon that's happening right now where people have hit the number of streaming platforms they really want to sign on for, and the average right now is 3.
Yeah.
And that number's not creeping up just because there's more streaming platforms coming on.
No.
So people are canceling Netflix to go onto Disney Plus, and then they're going to cancel Disney Plus to go back to Netflix. And it's going to be very interesting when you see Netflix with a debt to income of 7 times.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is, and there's actually a lot of privatization of streaming services out there. I've seen platforms that could, turn, where you and I could create our own streaming platform. And again, you're going to see a lot of those guys die off, and it's fine because the big guys like Netflix or Disney, we have yet to see until the dust settles who's surviving. Those are the guys that really should be there, as opposed to like the mom and pops. I mean, as much as I'd love to run my own streaming service with all these amazing subscribers, it's just not. That's ridiculous.
We should do an episode where we analyze the financials of a business.